Today, I want to talk about the textile and garment industry of Italy, as in made in Italy, or made in Italy Chinese way, or shall I say, made by China in Italy? So, it is no secret that made in Italy represents quality, reputation, endurance, finesse, art and fashion, and many more. But today's video is going to be a bit more unusual than my previous videos because it's going to be about Chinese garment workers working in Italy. What are the country-specific characteristics of the fast fashion industry supply chains and garment factories in Italy? Hello everyone, this is Asel Sorbekova and welcome to my channel where I help you understand matters of fast fashion and sustainable development the legal way. So it is all things fast fashion where I attempt to uncover and explain issues related to labor rights in the fast fashion industry. So without further ado, let's get it started. The video does not cover the whole Italy, but the city called Prato, which has its unique place in the history of Italian fashion. Prato is considered as one of the largest industrial districts in Italy, the largest textile center in Europe, and one of the most important centers in the world. The textile district of Prato itself is made up of about 7,000 companies in the fashion sector, of which 2,000 in the textile sector in the strict sense, obtaining about 2 billion euros with exports. However, what is most interesting about the district of Prato is that in recent years in Prato, the Chinese have formed one of the biggest Asian communities of Europe, second only to that of Paris, and this community in Prato has silently penetrated the various phases of the clothing supply chain in Italy. And in Italy and in Prato, of course, as I said before, international luxury brands operate here, both Italian and foreign, including Gucci, Ferragamo, Prada, Fendi, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Dior, Celine, and many others. So what do they produce in Prato? The companies of the textile sector produce fabrics for the apparel industry, textile furnishing products, yarns for the knitwear industry, knitwear and garments, non-woven fabrics, and special fabrics for industrial uses. And in particular, the textile center represents an area of reference for the ready-made fashion and the packaging of made-in-Italy clothes to such an extent that the Prato ready-to-wear is renowned through Europe. For this reason, Prato's textile clothing district is the main reference point for supplying for many international fashion brands. But it turns out all was made Italian way, purely Italian way, and by Italians until 1990s when the first wave of Chinese immigrants came to settle in Prato. Nearly all of them came from Wenzhou, a port city south of Shanghai. In Tuscany, business life revolved around small interconnected firms, just as it did in Wenzhou. The Prato area was a hub for mills and workshops, some of which made clothes and leather goods for the great fashion houses. If workers were willing to be paid off the books and by the piece, Prato offered plenty of opportunities, and many Wenzhouans found jobs here. So in the beginning, what happened was that Italians were giving jobs to these Chinese immigrants, and the Italian garment factories were subcontracting smaller Chinese businesses to finish off orders. Then what happened is that this subcontracting business partnership relationship all of a sudden changed when, to the biggest surprise of the Italians, the Chinese began to do the work on their own. By the mid-1990s, Wenzhouans were setting up the textile businesses in small garages where they were often living. So it's like, they were opening garment factories, sweatshops in their own homes. Soon they began renting empty workshops, paying with cash, and the authorities of Italy, of Prato, didn't ask too many questions. However, what happened was that Prato's business model was falling apart under the pressure of globalization, as it became harder for Italians to make a living in a manufacturing. Some of them welcomed the money that the Chinese workers brought into the local economy. If you could no longer be an artisan, they said, you could still be a landlord. So that was a little bit of a historical background, historical information to let you understand the context of how Prato is important and how the Chinese immigrants came to settle in that region. Now let's talk about the labor issues when it comes to the ready-made garment industry, the textile industry of Prato, when it comes to specifically the Chinese immigrants. The point is that these Chinese workers brought with themselves Chinese working conditions and practices to Italy. So they brought with themselves such things as flexibility to work overtime, willingness to work for low wages, as well as willingness to complete higher workloads. So that, of course, involves a lot of pressure, a lot of orders to complete within a limited working time, this kind of working environment as well. That was within the context of the Italian labor laws that were simply not working for the Chinese workers, because this was their decision, the decision to, abide by their own practices and their own working conditions that they actually brought with themselves from China. So they were basically, operating under, Chinese working practices, etc., according to their own cultural and traditional and etc. understandings, and they were not willing to collaborate with the Italian trade unions who wanted these Chinese workers to adhere to, follow the Italian labor laws. Another particularity was the willingness of Chinese owned businesses to cut costs and come up with prices that Italian owned businesses would not be able to pull off, because Chinese owned businesses were doing that at the cost of salaries, and also the fact that they were working in communities and families, oftentimes at their garages, at their homes. This all contributed to the fact that the Chinese were, cutting costs and also saving money in order to, come up with the best prices. So as I said, the Italians were not, couldn't simply have, come up with that idea. And it was actually unlawful to do that. So the Italians were doing all by the books. The Chinese, as I said, they brought with themselves their working labor practices and, their own experience on how to do things and how to do efficiently, which often was at the cost of labor, compromising labor, salary, health, etc. Another particularity was about low wages. So if the standard salary was around 1,800 US dollars in 2013, 2014, then garment workers in Prato would be getting only around 950, 14,000 US dollars per month. So as you can see, and as briefly mentioned before, the Chinese were willing to work at low cost, and they were doing that because partially they were doing it in families, in communities. So often, in order to they were looking at it at long term to set up businesses and to be recognized. They were willing to compromise the salaries so that their salary ended up being almost like half or only 75% of what they would be getting according to the law. Another particularity was that there was a situation of subcontracting workers whom garment factories in Italy would be paying less. So as I said briefly before, Italian businesses were hiring Chinese garment factories as subcontractors when, they would need to, finish orders or, just cut costs, etc., to be more efficient. Another particularity is about the competition that was developed between Chinese garment factories and Italian garment factories. in Prato. So just one clarification. When I say Chinese garment factories, I mean garment factories in Prato that were opened by Chinese, residents, by Chinese immigrants. Most likely they have already become Italians, but I'm just referring to their ethnicity, and I don't mean nationality. Based off on what has been said above, this created tension between two of them. Of course, competition when it comes to trade and business, it's good when it's healthy, but it is not good when it is unhealthy, because in chase of profits, businesses chase ways of setting lowest salaries, so that what we end up getting is low prices for stuff, for clothes, textile, for shoes, for bags, etc. And often when we look at the origin of this low price, it's because, we will see that workers did not get a good salary. It is surprising to see that in Italy this happened, that, oftentimes when people work underground or, as subcontractors, that, the system doesn't really work to change that, or that, formal businesses end up getting into partnership with informal businesses, so that this creates layers of production. And again, what does it show to us? What is the lesson that we can learn from the Chinese immigration to Prato situation? Well, that the fashion industry is a very tricky and is a very complicated sector, and that, oftentimes there can be informal economies involved, such as in the case of Chinese immigrants in Prato, and that when it comes to the high fashion and fast fashion industry, that there is always one cost, the human cost, or otherwise called as labor rights, and that cost translates into making as much profit as one can get from paying lowest salaries in the world.